Hello and welcome to another day of Unit 5. Today we're starting the first day of the respiratory system, and this is also day 5 of Unit 5, but it's respiratory system day 1. So today's aim is how does the anatomy of the respiratory system allow it to function efficiently? So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so like we said, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of the respiratory system today. But first, let's remember the reason for the season, ladies and gents, why our body needs to respirate or breathe in the first place, the release of energy that happens in cellular respiration. So, what is the equation for cellular respiration? I hope we all remember that it is glucose or C6H12O6 plus O2 yields ATP, carbon dioxide, and water. So we've got the products in orange, or excuse me, we've got the products in red and the reactants that are required to produce that ATP, glucose, and oxygen in orange. And we first talked about our digestive system, where that critical glucose comes in. But now we're talking about the respiratory system, the site of all important gas exchange. And the gases that are being exchanged are oxygen and carbon dioxide. How does our respiratory system anatomy allow us to do that? With a little help from the capillaries and a few other things. Let's go ahead and take a look. But first, oh no, this is a baby with a congenital heart defect. That means it had a heart defect present at birth. The term congenital means the condition is present at birth. Congenital heart disease is one of the most common types of birth defects, affecting up to 9 in 1 every 1,000 babies born in the United States. So part A, some basic vocabulary terms. We have first the trachea, which you might remember from yesterday, which is your windpipe. It's a large membranous tube reinforced by rings of cartilage that conveys air to and from the lungs, also known as the windpipe. So breathing and talking happens through that tube, which is alongside your esophagus in your throat. The trachea is not a muscular tube like the esophagus. Remember, the esophagus undergoes expansion and contraction in the form of peristalsis when we swallow. The trachea doesn't do that. Instead, it's, as said here, a large membranous tube reinforced by rings of cartilage, so it's firm, and that is how we breathe. Our bronchi or bronchus is singular, bronchi is plural because there's two, are the two main branches of the trachea extending into each lung. So the trachea goes down through our throat, into our chest, and then splits into two separate tubes. And at that point, when it diverges from the trachea, it becomes the bronchus on each side, the individual bronchus, or as a pair, bronchi. And the bronchi lead to smaller versions of themselves, little bronchioles, that end at our alveoli. The real superstar player in our respiratory system, the alveoli. When you look at the diagram of the alveoli, you might notice they look like little berries. And the little berries of the alveoli are really the fruit of the lungs, right? The most important part, just like the berry is the most important part of the tree, the fruit is the most important part of the plant, right? Because it allows it to reproduce. The alveoli are a critical part of the lungs, and it doesn't hurt that they're on the end of branches to really enhance that fruit tree metaphor. But at the alveoli, they are the air sacs in the lungs where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place. So gas exchange happens at the alveoli and between the alveoli and the capillaries. So when we inhale into our lungs, the alveoli are where the oxygen winds up and waits to be picked up by the capillaries and sent into our bloodstream to be distributed throughout the body. So now let's take a look at how all of this anatomy takes shape. And you can see here the image is maybe a little fuzzy, but you can see that the alveoli are little circles at the end of branches. And I'm just going to let all of these show up and then we'll talk about it. So we have up here our nasal passages, right? That's your nose and our mouth. And remember, the mouth is also obviously part of the digestive system, but we can breathe through our nose and mouth. So that's where we start. Then once we inhale and breathe in through our nose and mouth, the air passes through the trachea or windpipe until it reaches the two main branches that extend off of the trachea, the bronchi, or a singular bronchus, two together, bronchi. Then from the bronchi, we have the bronchioles, which are the little bronchi. They're the smaller branches that extend from the two large branches that leave the trachea. Then the organ, and the only organ we're talking about here in the respiratory system, are your lungs, which are in a pair. You can see that the lungs are a sort of a spongy-like tissue, and that spongy-like tissue allows for the passage of gases between the alveoli, these specialized air sacs, and the many capillaries that exist within the lungs. So they have this sort of like spongy, not dense texture because that facilitates this gas exchange process, which is why we have lungs. Interestingly, that spongy, open, wet texture is also why many infections present in the lungs, right? That space is room enough for bacteria sometimes to grow, and that can obviously give us an infection or an illness, and viruses can thrive in that region for the same reason. Further, here at the bottom of the respiratory system, looking sort of like a C right underneath your lungs, is the muscle called the diaphragm. And when you breathe in and out, your diaphragm expands and contracts. It expands when you inhale and contracts when you breathe out. Or no, forgive me, it expands when you exhale, and you can feel it. It expands when you exhale to push the air up, and it contracts when you inhale to pull the air in. And that muscle is a conscious muscle that we can control, but it also can work without our conscious control to allow us to breathe without thinking about it. Pretty cool muscle, the diaphragm. And that's a lung. And you can see there, that's a healthy lung in pink. And the black lung that has been damaged, that is filled with all sorts of tar and substances that you don't want inside of your lungs, is diseased. And you can see it's not able to inflate as large to take in as much oxygen. So if you spend a lot of time in your life smoking, over time, it will impact your body's ability to absorb oxygen and to exhale carbon dioxide. So this can cause major problems for your body's ability to maintain homeostasis beyond what you might think of, right? Beyond like coughing and lung cancer, this can cause a lack of oxygen to the brain. And in general, just say no to smoking. Because it is bad for your lungs. And the proof is in the pudding here. Take a look at those lungs. Wow. And look how big that pink healthy lung gets compared to that black smoker's lung. Wouldn't want to be it. All right. So next we have the cell and its environment. And we're talking all about the capillaries. The smallest blood vessel in our bodies, the capillaries, are close to every cell. There is a small amount of space between the capillaries and the body cells, and this space is filled with fluid. In fact, each of our many cells is surrounded by liquid. This fluid that surrounds our cells is made up of mostly water, with many substances dissolved in it. The intercellular fluid is important in helping to maintain stable conditions inside of each of our cells. Many materials are exchanged between the cells and the fluid. In turn, materials may be exchanged between the fluid and the blood in the capillaries. All of this is done to maintain homeostasis in every cell and remain healthy. So as you can see, the capillaries are constantly participating in this exchange of gases and nutrients throughout our entire bodies so that oxygen and nutrients can make their way into each individual cell, and so that waste can be carried out. And you can also see here on one end of the capillary, it is coming off of an artery, and on the other end of the capillary, it's traveling to a vein. So the capillaries are the only place in our bodies where the oxygenated and the deoxygenated blood mixes, and this again allows for the exchange of gases. And that is all we have to say about that. Oh, and you can see there, of course, just to highlight, the exchange is happening between our body cells and the capillaries. And also of note, because this process is occurring primarily via diffusion, there needs to be fluid, right? Diffusion occurs best in an aqueous environment, and that is what the intercellular fluid is. It's mostly water that also contains different materials dissolved in it, such as salts, such as other gases. Many materials are in this aqueous environment, but the reason that it is important is because it helps the process of diffusion occur more smoothly. And this is also another reason why it's very important to stay hydrated. Water is critical for our body's functioning. And that is the intercellular fluid, sort of depicted with these little dots. And it is important, again, because it is facilitating or helping diffusion to occur. Speaking of diffusion, what is the name of the process that allows substances to move from high to low concentration so that equilibrium is reached? That's diffusion. What allows cells to rid themselves of carbon dioxide once its concentration is too high in the cell? Why, that's diffusion. Where does carbon dioxide go from the cell? Into our capillaries so that it can be transported to the alveoli, so that when we exhale, when we're bringing in oxygen, the carbon dioxide is leaving through the same path, right? And we take in oxygen the same way we send out carbon dioxide. So the pathway of oxygen is in and the pathway of carbon dioxide is out, but it's the same organs, right? Because we're talking about the respiratory system. And last but not least, what allows oxygen to leave capillaries and go into the cell? Why, that's diffusion. And by George, I think you can figure out why we talked about diffusion right before we got into this topic. That, I believe, is all we have for you today. Let me make sure before I end this video that I'm correct. Yep, all that's left is for you to complete the exit ticket. Today's aim was, how does the anatomy of the respiratory system allow it to function efficiently? I hope you had a good time watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you all on Monday on Zoom. Bye, guys.